For today's video, we are going to talk about one of America's greatest failures. No. We're not talking about the U.S. loss to Germany in the World Cup. This is even bigger than that. This failure very easily could have led to the destruction of the United States before our nation's history even began. That is the magnitude of the failure we are going to discuss today. But to begin, let's turn back the clock a little bit, all the way to 1777. Each of the 13 colonies wanted independence from Great Britain, and they had united to form a military, a continental army, to take on Great Britain. But those 13 colonies did not want to yield to one central power. Each state wanted its own independence. Remember, back in 1754, Benjamin Franklin, of course, presented the Albany Plan of Union. And in that instance, of course, remember that little snake died. So, the colonists had a long legacy of wanting independence. And that's what they all wanted. They basically had been used, each colony had been used to governing its own self during Britain's long time of its rule. Their rule was essentially salutary neglect, which meant that each colony could basically run its own show. So that's exactly what they wanted to do. They didn't want to yield to Great Britain, but they didn't want to yield to a power somewhere within the 13 colonies. Each state wanted to rule its own interests. And the states were planning on doing that both during the Revolutionary War and after the war when it ended. They had no intention of having some big power, some big government watching over them. Therefore, it's not surprising that the colonists chose a system of government that was like a confederation. A confederation is when you have a loose group of people and there is no one person ruling over them. When you and your friends go hang out on a Friday night, you, in essence, form sort of a confederation. Unless you choose one of your friends to lord his or her power over you. Who knows? Maybe you do that. I don't know. Anyways, this was what they had created. They created what was known as a confederation. And they wrote down in 1777, they officially codified those rules in a document that would be known as the Articles of Confederation. And each state ratified those articles by 1781. So within those 4 years, all 13 states had said, this is the kind of government we want. Now, under the Articles of Confederation, there was basically one house of government. There was one branch, which was essentially the legislative branch. Now, within that branch, there were a whole slew of delegates, but each state had one vote. And we're transitioning now to states because they started to see themselves not as colonies, but as full-on states. Each state had its own vote. So there were 13 total votes, one per colony. Now, under this system, however, there were the very makings of it demonstrated some very serious problems. For example, within that system, for a bill to become law, it had to have 9 out of 13 states vote for it. That is, opposed to our normal system of law, where you need 51%, a basic majority to pass a law, you had to get 69% or more to vote to approve a law. There's a super majority to get anything done. Imagine you and your friends going out to choose a movie or to choose something to do, and you have to get 7 of the 10 to go along with your idea. That's going to be hard. Except this involved millions and millions and millions of people to basically go along with an idea. So this was a huge problem. Another problem, of course, was the fact that no amendment to the Articles of Confederation. You couldn't change the basic document unless all 13 states wanted to change something. This meant everyone literally had to agree. If there was a major problem with the system, everyone had to agree to change something. And you thought that voting for your class sweatshirt was a rather difficult endeavor. This was even more difficult because every single person had to go along with the change. In addition to all these laws, the laws that take a long time being passed, there was no power to enforce the laws. There was no executive branch. There was no chief executive. There was no president. There was nobody who could enforce the laws. So if, say, Virginia said, you know what, your law about providing military assistance at this time, I don't really want to do it. Sorry. They couldn't stop them. If a state chose to ignore a law, they could, and no one could stop them. So that was another major problem. And, this is the kicker, Congress had no power to tax whatsoever. There was no chance for Congress to raise any money, which would become a major problem. And make sure, it would basically make sure that the government would be completely and utterly broke ad infinitum. Finitum? Look that up. Soon, the reality of these problems became very apparent. The states owed a ton of money because they had been fighting a war for several years against the most powerful nation in the world. And there was no way to really pay it off. States came up with the idea, this brilliant idea, of just printing more money. Just print, and then, oh, look, we've got your money. And this, of course, just like Spain in the 1600s, led to major inflation. In 1779, one Spanish silver dollar, you could buy a Spanish silver dollar for $40. In 1781, you could buy that Spanish silver dollar, but it would cost you $146. That's how worthless American money became. It became very worthless in a very short of time. What did that mean for your average Joe living in Western Massachusetts or Southern Virginia? Your average Joe had a tough time paying for basic necessities because all the money he had and brought to market suddenly was worthless. The colonists, of course, were not complete idiots, and they realized that major changes needed to be made quickly. And so they said the government needed to be able to tax, and they said we need to give that power to the federal government. And in fact, most states went along with this, and in fact, 12 states voted to amend the Articles of Confederation and give Congress the power to tax. Except for Rhode Island. Rhode Island. That one little tiny state kept this problem festering and growing. Rhode Island! Anyways, as you can tell, things were bad. Unemployment was soaring. Rice exports were down. Southern plantations were been destroyed during the war and had the chance to rebuild. Each state printed its own money. You had $5 in Virginia, was not worth the same as $5 in, say, Kentucky. Things were wild. Things were crazy. Things were not working. The little money that we did generate, had to be sent immediately to other states to pay off the debts. So the economic crisis right now is going crazy. And the question remained, would the government ever change? Could it ever adapt to meet these growing problems? Something clearly needed to be done, but could anyone do it? Could anyone somehow make it happen? Enter now Daniel Shays. Daniel Shays was a Massachusetts farmer who resented growing taxes. Because even though the central government couldn't tax, the states could tax. He resented Massachusetts' taxes, and he said that it was putting too much of a burden on farmers. And he and a group of citizens met in Hatfield, and they said, down with the powers, down with the taxes. they must have had some sort of chant with their pitchforks and things. They petitioned. They went to then they marched to Springfield, to the state capitol, and they said, lower our taxes. And Springfield, of course, said, you all are crazy. You are all breaking the law, and you're all rebels, and you should all be thrown in jail. They resented that, as you can imagine. And Daniel Shays actually led some people, and they went and they even kidnapped and captured federal judges, so that way the federal judges couldn't take away farmers' land as a punishment. So this rebellion suddenly was getting out of control. In January 1787, he even got together 1,000 farmers, and they were going to go and take to the federal arsenal in Springfield, and they started marching to Springfield to take over the federal arsenal. The state militia had to be called to stop them, and this was the point that they actually had to call in the state militia. They showed up. Shots were fired. 4 people died. But then some of his followers, they kind of ran away. That was the end of his rebellion. So that brings you to a question. Why are we studying this guy if he just kind of, put up a stink for a few months? He got some farmers together and they tried to take over some guns and it didn't work. What's the big deal with him? Well, this is the big deal. At this point, people all through the 13 states started to say, wait a minute. We've got some wingnut farmer going crazy in Massachusetts. The thing is, though, is that what if there was another farmer, another person somewhere who wasn't quite as crazy, who actually knew what he was doing, and could actually lead an effective rebellion? That would mean the toppling of their status quo. That would mean the toppling of their governments, and it would lead to a new rebellion and a new revolution. That's what people were afraid of, the people in charge. That's when they said, we have got to change this. Yes, the economy had been bad. Yes, there were all sorts of money problems and unemployment and inflation and debt, but the fear of rebellion, that's what finally got everyone to say, we need to make some changes. So, some delegates began to meet in Philadelphia in 1787. Question remained, would they tweak the Articles? Or would they scrap them altogether and start something new? That is another story for another day. Have a good afternoon, and I will see you either tomorrow or Monday.